All right. Well, hi everyone. My name's Alper. I'm the Education Content Manager for this year's CodeDay Labs. I'm happy to welcome Maxwell Zimon, who will be talking to you guys about culture fit and soft skills interviewing, which are crucial skills for succeeding in the tech and CS industries. Max, if you'd like to give a short introduction about yourself and maybe even about your cat, and then we can get started.
Hey everybody, yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me back. I gave a version of this talk last year, and this one's going to be pretty similar, I suspect. I'll give an introduction of myself in due course, but I'm Max. Max is fine. You can call me Max. And this is Big Scout. She is always my erstwhile companion for meetings and talks and so forth. And so if at any point you find me irritating or stressful or you feel frustrated, I would recommend just looking at her and you'll find that you feel much better. It always works for me, at least, so I recommend it. So yeah, thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to chat with you all. And I want to start by focusing on the fact that I'm not really intending to just kind of talk at you for the full hour here. This is going to be about 25, 30 minutes of me presenting, and then the rest is just going to be a discussion, a Q&A. You can go ahead and put your questions in the question and answer chat whenever you want, including during the presentation. I probably won't answer them during the presentation. I'll probably get to them at the end, but that's just so that I can kind of go through what I have here to talk about in a reasonable amount of time. And then the most important part of this is really just chatting with all of you, hearing your concerns, finding out, what advice I can give you, how I can help you with the subject matter of the talk. So we'll come back to all that in just a second. This is the part where I give a little bit of an introduction. Again, I'm Maxwell Zimon. I'm a senior software engineer at Olo. Technically, I'm a senior software engineer 2, which doesn't really matter unless you know the company's internal ranking, so you can forget that information now that you've heard it. But Olo is a company that makes middleware for restaurants. So for example, and I think an example is the best way to explain what that means, I work on what we call our on-premise ordering, which is where when you sit down at a table, you have a QR code, you scan the QR code with your phone, and then you can place an order through the internet, and then someone will bring you your food right to your table, and they know what table you're at, they know what you ordered, they know who ordered what, all that sort of thing. That is what I work on, and we have many products related to that. It's a whole wide variety. If you've ever eaten at a Wendy's or a Noodles and Company or a Dairy Queen, I think, or about a million other restaurants, Jimmy John's, then you probably used our technology, even if you didn't know it, and that's kind of the way we like it. Prior to that, I was a senior engineer at Musicnotes, where initially I worked on web technology for them, and then after that, worked on sheet music composition and editing software. And prior to all of that, I got my bachelor's of arts in computer science and cognitive science from Case Western Reserve University, which is in sunny Cleveland, Ohio, which is also where I'm originally from. Last year when I gave this talk, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. I no longer live in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm now in Tucson, Arizona. However, Big Scout was here and is still here, so really not that much has changed. I think Spock was in the background last year too, so from your perspective, not that much is different. So another disclaimer I want to give before we move into the meat of everything is I'm not here telling you that I'm a #1 expert, that I know everything that there is to know. What I'm here to tell you is that I've spent a lot of time either being an interviewee or being an interviewer. I've probably given a few dozen interviews as in administered them in my career thus far, and I've sat for probably almost as many as the interviewee. And so I have observed a number of things over the years through my own experience, through the experiences that my friends and colleagues have had, that I think suggest that there are some areas that we don't talk about when we talk about tech hiring. We talk a lot about, and CodeDay is going to do a great job of preparing you skill-wise for doing tech interviews. But we don't talk as much about the soft skills component, the concept of culture fit. So when I say these terms, what do I really mean? Well, some of these terms are kind of purposefully nebulous. When I say soft skills, for example, What I'm talking about is all the bits and pieces of how a professional person who, is a member of the workforce and kind of engages in the endeavor of having a job in an engineering organization, all the things that make you successful at that aren't just what do you know how to do, what languages do you know, what tools do you know how to use, how good are you at solving problems. And so this can encompass a lot of big things. It can encompass, how do you deal with stress? How do you deal with adversity or challenges in your work? And it can encompass, how do you view yourself and your relationship with the company that is your current employer or your prospective employer? And that's where culture fit comes in. Culture fit, like soft skills, is also a nebulous term. It is nebulous on purpose because different companies like to use it to mean different things. Some companies, when they use the term culture fit, are talking about how similar is this person to the people we already have? Do we feel like we could assimilate this person into our engineering organization and not have to change ourselves or change very much? They know all the same things that we know, they like the same things that we like, and to be perfectly frank, sometimes it's, are they similar to us enough demographically? Are they similar to us enough, even things like age-wise, that we just feel like we're not going to have to rock the boat or change things in order to have them on board into our company? That is not the definition of culture fit that a healthy organization, or an organization that I think most people would want to work for, would use. There are employers that use it. I have experienced that. I don't recommend it. But that is not what I'm talking about when I say culture fit, and that is not what we want to focus on when we say culture fit. And a big part of what I'm going to be helping you do here is sort of suss out the differences. A company with good hiring practices that cares about its employees and that cares about hiring people from a diverse range of backgrounds with a diverse range of skills is going to use culture fit very differently, and they're going to use it more like the term culture add, which you will also sometimes hear. A company like that is going to use it to mean, what does this person bring to us apart from their technological capabilities, apart from their skill at doing the meat of the job, that will add to the environment at this company beneficially? Are they, a helpful and clear communicator? Do they have a perspective that maybe we don't have right now? Do they have some skills that maybe we don't have, even if we're not actively using them? If the question's not, is this person sufficiently similar to us? The question is, will this person add to our environment in a positive way because they are different than us, or because they bring something that we don't currently have, other than that we need another Java engineer, or we need another Python engineer, or we need another DBA, or whatever it is? That's what a company with, I think, a healthy culture is typically looking for. Different companies will express that somewhat differently. Companies have their little lists of values and so forth, and they'll use them a little differently. But a company that, in my view, is collaborative, friendly, that is ethical in its interviewing practices, will be using that latter definition. And that is the definition that we use at Olo. That is the definition that we tried to use at Musicnotes and at places that I've been happy to work. Other places that haven't been as good, there are some that are not on that little slide back there because they weren't as positive an experience. They may not be using that definition. And to be candid, therefore, I would say I maybe don't recommend working for them. So one of the things we'll talk about is, how can you tell? Now, one of the interesting things about that question of how can you tell is that a lot of it depends really on who you are as an interviewee. It's very, very common to come into an interview and feel really nervous. It's very common to come into an interview and think about, oh my God, I've got to prove myself to them. They're evaluating me to figure out whether I'm good enough to come work for them. And therefore, my concern is entirely, am I going to know enough things to pass this interview? Am I smart enough? Am I technically capable enough? Am I going to give them the answers they're looking for, whatever questions they're going to ask? It's very common to come in with that perspective and let that kind of eat you up and let it kind of distract you from some other things that I really recommend that you spend some time focusing on. Some things like elements of culture fit that will help you, and also that will give you an opportunity to demonstrate some of those soft skills about communication, collaboration, professionalism that I mentioned before. A lot of people, when they come into an interview, are really worried that, you know, they got there as a mistake, they're a sham, they're an imposter. This is totally normal. I'm probably the 400th person to tell you that this is normal, but everybody feels this way at first. You worry that you'll be outed or that there's a secret to the interview, that you have to say the right combination of words in the right order. But the answer is that most of the time that isn't true at all. Most technical interviews are interviews being conducted by your future colleagues. And what they're really trying to figure out is, if I need to work with this person, how and when can I rely on them? Do they have the knowledge, but also are they somebody where I think that if I needed them for something, if I was struggling and needed help, if I, you know, had a bunch of work to do and I needed to help get that organized or sent out to someone else, is this person somebody I could rely on and come to and get help from in a way that would be respectful, communicative, and result in actual work getting done? So all of that is shorthand for saying, what is the habit of this individual, of this person who is the interviewee, when they are working in a professional environment? Are they a professional, as that term extends to a software engineering culture? Some other kinds of cultures, for example, the medical culture, my wife is a physician and she's experienced this firsthand. They use the term professionalism in a way that is very heavily weighted, and that is about always showing up 100% on time, working 80 hours a week, never questioning people who are superior to you in the hierarchy. That is not what I mean here. When I say that you should consider embodying a professional, what I mean is you're a person who is here for a reason, knows what they're looking for and what they want, and is willing to provide to whoever is doing the interviewing information that will help them verify that you are, in fact, that person that you say you are. That is to say that it's not someone who is just trying to jump through a horrible gauntlet of interviewing. Now, that's not to say that it won't feel that way to you, but as a professional sort of person in this industry, thinking about it from the perspective of, this is a challenge, this is interesting, this is something where I can learn something and showcase myself a little bit. Thinking about yourself as someone who basically deserves to be there, that is the biggest challenge. And that is also the thing that will give you the biggest success in interviewing. One of the things I'm going to do over these next few minutes and these next few slides is give you some tools to help you snap into that mindset a little bit. Feel like you can showcase yourself, feel like you can talk about what you know and what you've done without being worried about that sense of, oh my gosh, I'm not going to survive this, I'm not going to make it through, I've got to have a job, I've got to get this done, even though that may reflect reality. I want to help you suspend some disbelief a little bit and come into the technical interviews or even the non-technical ones that you go into with a mindset and a mode that will more closely match what it will be like when you're actually working and when you know and hopefully like your colleagues, and that will give them a sense of who you really are without the layers of anxiety that can tend to cloud that. The last thing I want to give you before we move on to some specific techniques and types of questions and approaches that will hopefully help you with this, is I want you to think about your personal goals as an interviewee. We're going to talk about this a little bit more at the end, but now is a good time to start thinking about it. What do you want to get out of this industry? Do you just want any tech job that pays okay, has okay benefits, and will get you money so that you can live your life and pursue your, hobbies or whatever else you want, pursue your relationships, do the rest of the things that you need in your life? Will any job do, or are there specific things that you want? If you end up in a position where you have more than one option, which I will tell you is not at all uncommon, you're going to be well prepared coming out of this. There's plenty of employers who need to hire right now, and we'll talk about that more later. You may find yourself with more than one opportunity without realizing that you were going to get into that situation. How are you going to prioritize between those? Can you get something that is even maybe more than what you set your expectations at initially if you find the right match? is there an ideal that you have in your head of what you would really like to experience? Are there technologies you'd really like to work with? Are there, kinds of people or ways of doing business that you'd really like to work with? Know all the answers to those things, even if in the end you end up settling. And that way you can really have in your mind a clear knowledge of what the opportunity cost and the trade-offs are when you interview and when you consider offers for jobs. The truth is that every time you interview and every time you take a job or turn up it or turn down a job, you're paying an opportunity cost. You're saying, I'm going to do this instead of this. And so you have the right, and you absolutely can think about this as well. It's not just, will you, company, accept me? It's also, if I chose to work for you, what am I gaining and losing by doing that? I would ask all of you to start thinking about that right now in the back of your heads if your mind starts to wander while I'm going through some of the rest of this. And then when we get to the question and answer session, these are topics that we can talk about. How to, if you want thing X, whatever that thing is, you tell me, how can you determine whether a company has that thing? That's really what I want to help you with. And that's the fundamental core of what I want to get across to you today. If you take nothing else from this, think of yourself as a professional person who is capable, does deserve to be there, and has options. And even if you feel like you're lying to yourself a little bit, that is okay. The point is, consider your options from the perspective of someone who might be okay, where things might turn out all right, and it will be a lot easier to make decisions about where you're going to end up. And I know that it's hard, which is why I have some ideas, some suggestions for you for how you can maintain these views inside of an interview when you get some of the curveballs that happen during interviews, especially technical interviews. So what do I mean by curveballs? Well, when you come into interviews, you're going to be asked questions you don't know how to answer. You're going to get questions you just, aren't sure what they mean. You're not sure what the right answer is. You maybe just don't know enough about the subject to have a clear answer. So for example, at Olo, we are very concerned with matters of scale because we deal with millions of orders a day. So I may very likely ask an interviewee, can you tell me about a time when you had to scale a system from some small number of users to a large number of users? Now, not everybody has experience with that. That's okay. Remember, if you are a professional individual, if you are a person who, again, you're in the interview, they've already agreed to take the time to talk to you, you belong there, you deserve to be there. Companies do not interview people that we're not interested in. We don't have time. There's no such thing as an interview for the sake of courtesy. A healthy organization does not interview people just to check a box. So you're there because you're supposed to be. The fact that they're asking you a question that you may not know the answer to or that you're not sure about doesn't mean that you're about to fail or that you're about to fall out. What you do is you think about, how can I respond to this in a way that still highlights, well, maybe I don't have this particular skill or this particular experience, but I'm a person you can rely on even regardless of that. How should you respond? How should you not respond? I would recommend avoiding any kind of a defensive response. It's natural to feel a little caught out when somebody asks you something that you don't know the answer to, but it's really important not to respond in a way that suggests that you feel frustrated or agitated by the fact that you don't know the answer. Even if you feel that way, it's okay to feel that way. Feelings are valid, but I wouldn't respond that way. Likewise, I wouldn't disengage or redirect. I wouldn't say, forget that question, let me tell you about a time when I did X. I wouldn't tell an unrelated story because interviewers will pick up on that. It's okay, and I wouldn't consider it redirection to use an example, or if you think of something similar that isn't right on there, to say, well, I'm not completely sure that I know about this, but I have done this and this, and is that similar to what you're looking for? And it probably goes without saying, but I wouldn't lie and I wouldn't fuzz it. If someone asks you if you know about AWS, for example, and you've never really used AWS, or you used it once, for a class or something, and then didn't really ever touch it again, I would be honest, just say that, say, hey, yeah, I don't know that much. I've had a very small exposure to it, but I've worked with systems X and Y that are similar, if you have, and I'm confident that I can pick up whatever I need. And so you're already hopefully getting some of the ideas of what I would recommend that you respond with, but curiosity is good. no, I don't know much about, dealing with problems at scale. Can you tell me about some of the problems that you've encountered? And maybe I'll tell you what my thoughts would be on how to resolve it. No, I don't know about AWS, but here are some, I've worked with Azure, I've worked with Google Cloud, here are some other things that I've done that are similar. And then try to engage in a conversation. One of the great ways that you can tell whether a tech company is a company that encourages collegiality and encourages a communicative environment is when you talk with your interviewers, are they willing to engage with you? Are they willing to have a back and forth about the questions that they're asking? Or are they asking you questions off a list and then just moving on if you don't know the answers? Sometimes that can be down to the individual interviewer being poor or having a way that they do things that they don't want to change from. But sometimes, especially if over multiple interviews, you see that everyone is doing that, this can really give you some useful information. How your interviewers respond when you honestly tell them that you don't have specific experience can give you very interesting information about a company. And so it's still an opportunity to learn a little bit about whether you might be a fit, even if you didn't get to tell them that you were an expert on whatever particular topic. Likewise, you're sometimes going to get questions that don't have a clear ending answer. I will give a great example of this. At OLO, the last interview step is what we call a practical interview. It is a coding assessment, but it is not an algorithms assessment like what you might get at like a Google or a Facebook, where they're expecting you to regurgitate information that you learned in like a college or high school computer science class. Like, oh, implement a linked list for me. Oh, do you know how to write a graph search? We don't ask questions like that. Speaking personally, I would advise you to avoid companies that ask questions like that, but people want to work for Google. I don't blame you for wanting to work for Google. If you have to deal with those kinds of things, there are techniques, and we can discuss that in the Q&A, for learning how to answer those kinds of rote questions. But OLO's practical interviews do not have an end state. We give you a scenario, we watch you and work with you as you engineer a solution to that scenario, and every time you finish, we make it harder. We give you more. There's always more. It doesn't end. You'll also get open-ended questions. We'll ask you things like, suppose that you were going to solve this problem in this circumstance, where would you start? How would you do it? There's no one right answer to a question like that. The purpose of questions like this, the reason that we give this practical interview and the reason that we ask open-ended questions is not, again, to catch you out. It is not to pull back the curtain and reveal that you don't know what you're doing. What it is actually the opposite. We want to see how you think when you're given an open-ended problem. We really want to know if there's something that's not perfectly well-defined, how will this person respond to that? It's very difficult in an engineering organization if all of your engineers will only work when they're given extremely specific parameters. A big part of being an engineer is not putting the widget in the right place, but asking questions to ascertain what the right place for the widget is. So when you get these kinds of theoretical questions, oh, how would you build a city on the moon? How would you solve this potential, server-side problem that you have never heard of before? How would you do whatever it is the thing is? How would you approach this theoretical problem that maybe would never be dealt with in real life? What I would recommend is don't answer right away. Take some time, really think about the problem. It is okay to say, let me think about that for a second, and then think about it. That is actually a perfectly fine thing to do. People are afraid of dead space. I personally am never short for words because it's who I am. And so I have a tendency to want to fill up space with communication. You don't have to do that. Avoid assuming that there is any kind of a right answer. Just focus on, let me fully assess this situation. And likewise, avoid bypassing the problem. When you're asked a question like this, the interviewer is probably looking that you really do respond to the substance of the question. This is a situation where, yes, you can definitely mention your other experience, things that you've done that are related, but you want to do that only in order to come back to the question that you're being asked. So you can say, oh, well, this reminds me of a time when I did this or that, and that makes me think X and Y. But don't go into your anecdote about your other time and then not come back to what's being asked, because really we're looking for how you deal with the specific situation that you're being given. And I know that sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Don't give up. you don't need to say, I don't know. The worst thing you can do in a situation like this is say, I don't know, and then leave it there. Say, I'm not sure what I would do. It's fine to say, I'm not sure what I would do, but you have to follow it up with, but I would start by something. And that's why you want to do things like ask follow-ups. If I ask you a question and the question is vague or it seems confusing, if I said to you, build a city on the moon, which is the kind of thing that some kinds of organizations like to give as interview questions, you might want to ask some follow-up questions. How many people? Why are we doing this? How are they getting there? What are the constraints on this problem space that I've given you that is very large, maybe arbitrary? Follow-up questions are good. Follow-up questions lead to a conversation, and the conversation is where you want to be. Because if you can snap your interviewer into feeling like they're having a conversation with you like they would with a colleague, that's going to check a lot of boxes for them. That's going to make them feel like this is someone I can work with. And yeah, think out loud if you can. This doesn't come naturally to everybody, and it's okay. When I'm administering practical interviews, I always tell people, hey, it's okay if you are somebody who needs to sit and think and then say what you're thinking. If you need to write the code and then explain it rather than just talking about it as you're writing it, that is totally okay. Just make sure that you do eventually clue your interviewers in, to what you're thinking. It is okay to not answer right away, but after you've said, let me think about it for a moment, then once you've digested your thinking, say what you're thinking. Or if you're comfortable thinking out loud, which I personally am, then go ahead and do that. That's a great thing to do. And again, an interviewer from a healthy company that is looking to have a healthy relationship between employees may join in and try to help you through your questions. They're not going to give you answers because they are looking for how you think about things, but it's going to feel more like a conversation. If it feels more like a conversation, that's a really good sign. And remember, fundamentally, the goal here is think about it like you're being hired to solve this problem. That's your goal, So you're an expert. You got this far. You're in the interview. You are capable of answering the question. Even if in your heart of hearts you don't feel that way, that is the way to respond to the interviewer. That is the way to approach it. And you might be surprised. I think you will be surprised as you go through more interviews with how often it turns out that you actually are capable and that you just needed a second to think through it and build the structures in your brain to allow you to answer it. The last thing I want to note is that there are questions you don't have to answer. There are things that you should never be asked about. Now, I'm not an attorney and I'm not an HR professional, so I can't give you that kind of advice, but I have run this by a few of those. And I can tell you that interviews with companies that have a healthy culture and that are looking for a positive culture fit, they are not going to ask you questions in this category over here. You should not be asked questions about membership in a protected group. That's anything, how old are you, disability, your gender identity, your race or your religion, your marital status. Interviewers tend, even an innocuous question like, oh, do you have kids? Oh, I go to synagogue. I've been to synagogues in Cleveland. I see you're from Cleveland. What synagogue do you go to? Those are not appropriate questions for an interview. If you think that the question was asked innocently, in a sense of, oh, maybe the interviewer doesn't know that this isn't okay, then yeah, if you want to, you can engage with that. But it's 100% okay if you get asked a question like that to simply say, I'm sorry, I'm not really comfortable answering that. So somebody asking you, for example, flat out, how old are you is not okay. Things like, oh, what year did you graduate high school? I graduated in 2014. Not okay. Asking questions like, how many years of experience with X do you have? That is typically okay. But if you suspect that they're using that to suss out how old are you or to try to be ageist, then it is appropriate to push back. Remember that in an interview context, like I said before, you are there to find out if you're a good fit for this organization and if they're a good fit for you. You are always welcome to politely refuse to answer a question that is coming close to these lines and to establish boundaries. And remember, I understand the pressure. I understand the feeling of, oh my God, I need to get a job. I need to get this figured out. But you don't deserve to work a job where people are going to mistreat you in this way. And frankly, in the tech industry, even now, there are so many jobs that you can find a place that will not do things like ask you questions that are illegal to ask. it is okay to say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with where this is going. Thanks for your time. I think we're done. I've never had to do that. I've never seen it happen in one of my interviews that I've given, but it does happen. It happens fairly frequently on a broad scale. I mean, not so much that hopefully, none of you will ever experience this, but if you do, now you're prepared. And sadly, it's not so uncommon that I can say that it won't happen to you. A couple of other areas that are just some quick boundaries. It's not really appropriate to ask someone for your current salary. I don't think really even technically they're allowed to. You will frequently be asked, what is your salary expectation? Personally, I advise not giving a hard answer to that question. I advise saying something like, well, I have such and such experience, and I've done such and such things, and so I want to be paid commensurate with that. But you can give one if you want. Some places will really press you for one, some places won't. Personally, I prefer to not press, and as a technical interviewer, I would never even be in the position of asking that question. That kind of a question should only come from an HR representative. And likewise, companies may have to ask you things to ascertain that you're of legal age to work. They may have to ask you things to ascertain that you are legally permitted to work in the country that you're interviewing in. If you're working for certain organizations, you may have to ask further questions or complete a background check in order to deal with things like, for example, if you're working for a company that needs a certain kind of government security clearance, you may have to answer some questions related to that. That will almost always be the HR person asking those questions, and it will almost always be after hiring. They will set the expectation with you when the process begins, hey, you have to complete this background check, but they won't typically do it unless and until they're really looking to extend an offer. And even then, a technical interviewer who's asking you technical questions, unless it's a very, very small company, should never be the person asking you those questions. So what am I really driving at here? If I'm summing all of this up into one last big piece of advice, and I've said it a bunch, and I'm just going to keep hammering it home, prioritize your happiness. Think about when you interview, what would it be like to work with the people that I'm talking to right now? Am I going to have the opportunities to grow that I need? What questions can I ask? It's always good to ask questions. I strongly, strongly recommend at the end of every interview, ask questions. What questions can I ask that will help me understand whether this company meets my goals and will give me what I need? Not just, am I giving them what they need? Make your choices, compromises if you need to, with full awareness of what you want and why you want it. I need a job that will get me this and this so I can achieve this. I need a job that is located here so I can be near these people. Things like that. Know exactly why, what you're sacrificing for what else and why. This extends, by the way, to things like salary. My first job out of college was with a company that is not on the list that I gave you at the beginning of this talk. I did not like working there. I felt culturally they were not a good fit for me. And to be perfectly frank, going back to the slide that we just talked about, they had some hiring practices that were pretty dubious in retrospect. For all I know, they still do. I took a $10,000 pay cut so that I could go and work for a company, Musicnotes, that fit my needs better. Now, that's a very privileged thing to be able to do. I was very, very fortunate that I got to do that. I do not guarantee that everyone will be in that position, and it is okay if you're not. But the reason that I want to mention that is that you should think of everything as being on the table. If you could make $80,000 or $90,000, that extra 10K may not be worth it unless you know what you're going to use it for and what you need it for. Otherwise, is $10,000 worth your happiness? Well, I'm not saying the answer is yes or no. I don't know you, but you should know what the answer is for yourself. And you should know that if you're compromising on how much you're going to like working at a place in order to get more money, you should know why you're making that compromise. If you're, on the other hand, if you're saying, I'm going to take the lower paying job, you should know why you're doing that. Maybe you really like the company's social mission. Maybe you think this company is gonna treat you better. Maybe you just think the tech is cooler. Whatever. Have reasons for the trade-offs that you make. That's my key point. And again, ask questions that will help you figure out the answers to these kinds of things. So, for example, if you're concerned about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Sorry if I bungled that acronym, my brain just blanked for a second. You could ask explicitly, how does your company approach these kinds of issues? Do you have employees whose job is to help the company retain diverse talent? Olo, for example, does. I'm not trying to shelter my current employer. I'm just saying that, for example, it does and smaller companies may not. If you're concerned about whether the company is a company that's going to take political stances or that has a religious bent, it's not uncommon, and not in this country, it's in the United States, it's not illegal for a company to have that, although it, depending on circumstances, can be illegal for them to discriminate on the basis of it. You should ask, does this company have a policy about political discussions at work? Some people really like it when the company says you're not really supposed to discuss politics at work. Some people really dislike that. They feel that it really prevents them from bringing their whole selves to work. Whatever your answer is, it is okay to ask, as long as you ask in a way that is, I'm curious, I'm trying to learn more, I want to see if we're a good fit, and is not, how dare you have or not have this policy, because you don't want to put someone on the defensive. You want to get the information that you can then use to make an accurate determination for yourself. A great question to ask at the end of an interview is there anything else you would like to know from me? Is there anything else that I could tell you that we didn't have a chance to get to that would be helpful? I often ask that question at the end of interviews just because I am curious how people will respond. A lot of the time people say, no, I think I got everything I need. Sometimes I get very interesting questions as a result of that. And it can really help because people will come away from interviews with these little doubts in the back of their head. You will, and your interviewers will as well. And getting as much of that on the open as possible is great. And that goes back to the other question categories I was mentioning. If someone makes a remark to you and you think in the back of your head, I'm not sure that this is the right place for me, you can always ask, what did you mean by that? Can you tell me more about that? It is always a good thing to do. And you should almost always have time to do it. So I really, really recommend it. At the end of all of this, summing it all up before we move to questions, think about your needs and your goals and come into the interview with the attitude that you are someone who is supposed to be there, deserves to be there, and you can handle what they're giving to you, even if you don't know the exact answers. Learning to do that, practicing doing that. You can practice with your friends. You can do mock interviews. That's a great thing to do. You can look online. If you go on GitHub, for example, and search for interview questions from major companies, you will often find them. I really recommend it. It's very helpful to do that. That is what I would encourage you to take away from this. And by the way, again, not to super shill for my current employer, but we are hiring at Olo. We do hire interns as well as junior engineers as well as senior engineers. So whatever place you're looking at, I actually work on with the interns on their capstone projects, which are projects that are material contributions to the company outside of their assigned teams, which they complete and present at the end of each summer. So if the idea of working with me doesn't sound terrifying or unpleasant, and it's okay if it does, then please consider shooting me an email and I can hook you up with somebody who'd be interested in talking about that. Now, at this point, I would love to open it up to questions. Whatever questions you have, just go ahead and submit them to the question and answer section on the side. And yes, I really hope this information has been helpful. I hope there are other things I can answer for you. Anonymous attendee asks, what's your take on the phrase, fake it till you make it? I think it depends on what you mean by the term fake it. If what we mean is come across as best you can, like you know what you're doing and you deserve to be there, that's something I would encourage. Obviously, like I said, I would never, say that you know something that you don't know. I would never represent myself as having experience I don't have. But in terms of combating imposter syndrome, in terms of feeling like you deserve the experience that you're having, yeah, I strongly recommend it. It's strange how acting like you deserve to be there, even when you don't feel that way, eventually leads to you feeling like you should be there. It won't happen all the time. It won't happen for everyone, but it works out. And so I'm in favor of that term for that purpose. Anonymous also asks, or a different anonymous asks, what's the most common question that is asked? I would think I would need some more information. Do you mean technically, do you mean a question that the interviewee asked the interviewer? Tell me a little bit more about what you mean, and I will come back to you. Attendee asks, is it common to feel like you don't know what you're doing going into a new job or a new company? Yes, every time. If you have work to do, initially, you're not going to be sure that you know what you're doing. It happens, in my view, 100% of the time. It is okay and normal. Good companies will know that, and they will have systems in place to help you. So for example, at Musicnotes, when you started on your first day, you were given a schedule of meetings where you would meet with representatives from every department in the company who would tell you, this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is how we fit into the big picture. You were not just dumped right into the pool. You would get introductions to the type of agile that was used. You would have meetings with your manager, with your colleagues, and they would help explain things to you. It is very, very common to feel that way. At Olo, we actually have a 2-day orientation period followed by many weeks of onboarding. So yes, normal, natural, not anything to worry about. So coming back to the question from before, what are the most common technical questions? It really, really depends on the company's interviewing culture. There is no one answer to that question, unfortunately. The FANG companies, that's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, they like to ask these questions that are based on the computer science curriculum that you would probably have as a college student. Those questions are probably very common numerically because they're so frequently asked in every interview. You know, like, how would you reverse the order of a linked list? How would you, write a depth first search of a graph? Just because they're common doesn't mean that that's what you want. What I would recommend is if you want to find out whether a company that you're going to interview with has questions they really like to ask, I would go on Glassdoor, go on Indeed, take a look around. It's perfectly okay, by the way, to ask your HR contact, what kind of questions should I expect in this interview? What is this interview going to be about? What should I focus on? That is an okay question to ask, and I strongly recommend it. I should probably put that in the main presentation, actually. That is always good. I can also tell you that from my experience, when I'm asking technical questions, what I'm typically looking for is, what kind of depth and breadth do you have? So what are the experiences that you have in situations where you had to adjust to a big change that was happening? What are some big challenges that you've had? When you are given a new problem or a new ticket, how do you go about resolving it? Those kinds of very broad questions are the things that I would say are the most common, but it varies very substantially. Anonymous asks, I'm not comfortable when talking sometimes. I might make the conversation awkward, and then I'll feel guilty about what I said. What should I do to feel more comfortable talking with interviewers? Hey, I feel you. That's totally normal. You are far from the only person, especially in engineering. I always worry about speaking in generalities, but as engineers, we are very focused on sitting quietly and doing our work. That's not uncommon. I would say it's an interesting question because if you feel guilty about what you said, I would be curious what is driving that guilt. Do you feel like you got it wrong? Do you feel like you're taking up space where you shouldn't be taking up space? That's something that I hear a lot from people who are new or inexperienced in interviews, is that they're afraid to kind of fill the room with themselves. It's a very common stressor. And what I would say is, remember, the point of the interview is they want to talk to you. They are interested in you. They want to hear what you have to say, or they wouldn't have bothered. So it's very difficult because practice is what's going to help you get there. But I would say take a moment to sit with yourself before the interview and remind yourself you're there because they want you there. You're there because they're interested in hiring you. They are not trying to weed you out. They're trying to find things that support you. And so if you say something awkward, it happens all the time. Every interview I'm in, I say something that I think later, why did I say that? That didn't really make sense. Or, the interviewee will say something, and I will tell you from personal experience, 99.9% of the time, I gloss over that. If they say something a little weird that doesn't quite make sense, maybe I make a note, but it's not one misstep, one thing that I didn't quite get. It's not going to be a deal breaker. You're going to be okay. There is a lot more leeway than that, unless, again, you're working with a company whose goals are not aligned with your goals. If you're working with a company that would discount you because you said something awkward or because you were a little bit uncomfortable or seemed uncomfortable, I would shy away from those companies. It's normal and natural to be nervous in an interview, and companies should respect that. Do you have advice on demonstrating soft skills during the technical portion of an interview? Guillermo asked that question. Yes. when you're talking about code, if you're writing code, if you're really getting in deep on a technical situation, I really recommend a couple of things. First of all, try to come back up to the surface every few minutes and say, hey, are you following me? Does this make sense what I'm saying? Do you feel like I'm answering your questions? I'm a big fan of saying, does that answer your question at the end of asking the question? Because if it doesn't, they will tell you. And if it doesn't, and if you don't ask, they may just assume that you thought you were fine and go on. But if you have a chance to clarify, you'll always get it. Likewise, if you're writing code, asking questions before you start writing any code, great idea. Stopping in the middle and asking questions, also a great idea. And if you find yourself going down a rabbit hole, it is very common in the practical exams that we give at OLO, the questions that we ask are hard. They are hard on purpose, not to trip you up, because we want to see what happens when you stop and you realize, oh, wait, this isn't quite what I meant to be doing. That happened to me. I thought I was failing the interview because I stopped after a minute and I was like, wait a minute, I'm going down a road here that is not right, that is not close. Surfacing and saying, hey, I don't think I'm doing this right. Let me step back and try to resolve it is a great thing to do. I know it seems counterintuitive, but it's a fantastic idea because it will signal to the interviewer, this person is self-aware. This person is thinking about what they're doing on a meta level. Fantastic. I love to see it. I have passed people through practical interviews that I otherwise might not have, because at the end of the interview or even during it, they said, wait a minute, I know I made a mistake there. Here's how I would change it in the future. Dipendra asks, where can we find and practice appropriate technical questions other than GitHub? So I do recommend Glassdoor for this. People will often go to Glassdoor for large companies and type in like what questions were asked during interviews. I, off the top of my head, do not have a ton of other good resources for you right this second, but it's something you can follow up with me on. I'm sure I can get you some that are good. HackerRank can be fun if you want to try some puzzles, some technical puzzle questions that are pretty reasonable. I would recommend that. And beyond that, it's really a matter of ask your HR contact, what sort of things should I be looking forward to getting asked in these interviews? And then I would kind of go from there. The nice thing about our current state is that if you're being asked about Docker or C# or Python or whatever, somebody else has been asked these questions before. So Stack Overflow is your friend, Google is your friend. I'm sorry that that's kind of a general answer, but feel free to reach out to me after this if you have some more specific questions and I can come back to it. Anonymous asks, do interviewers care what you're wearing? What's your go-to fit for interviewers? Well, I'm a big fan of this flamingo shirt that I have right here. This is actually my favorite shirt. But it really depends on the company culture, especially remote company versus in-person company. What I would say is, perfectly okay to ask your HR contact on a phone screen, what do people typically wear? Because a lot of companies that have more relaxed dress codes will just be able to be like, hey, we don't really care. Secondarily, what I would say is try to dress one level above what the average person of the company is going to be wearing. So if the company has a totally relaxed dress code and the only rule is please wear clothes, then I would go for like business casual. Collared shirt, collared shirt and slacks, for example. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to gender this clothing. You should dress in the way that feels true to yourself and makes you feel comfortable. But the specific article of clothing that you're wearing, if you're somebody who likes to wear a dress, then it would probably not be like a sweatshirt dress, even if you might wear that to work, which is perfectly fine. Go one level above that. On the other hand, if people are going to be showing up in suit and ties, which does happen, especially in the financial sector or the consulting sector, then you need to meet them where they're at and go ahead and wear that. And it's a valid thing to say, am I going to be comfortable wearing business formal, business casual? And also I will just mention, because I touched on it, I know that the question of if you're in the LGBTQ community, the question of how you present yourself at work is a really fraught one. I don't pretend to have all the answers on this, but what I would say is it's tricky. If you are somebody who prefers to present one way and would maybe present a different way once you're comfortable, that's okay. If you're somebody who feels confident and wants to be sure that people will accept you presenting the way you normally present, that's also fine. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer, unfortunately. However, I will say that any company that would ding you for dressing in the way that fits who you are, rather than like dressing, if there's an expectation that you dress formally, that's one thing. If there's an expectation that you dress in a way that like fits your perceived age or identity or whatever, I would really frown upon that. And I think it's unlikely to happen, but if it does, that's one of those quick disqualifiers, like I mentioned in one of those other slides. Taylor asks, what should I do if I'm given a whiteboard programming question that's way over my head and I'm stuck having a hard time solving it? The first thing I would say is step back for a second. Before you say anything to the interviewer, take a second, look at the question, read it over again, and think to yourself, what is challenging to me about this question? What are the angles that I'm not sure how to proceed on? So going back to my build a city on Mars example, I think I said the moon before, but we'll say Mars. Well, it would be natural to feel in over your head on a question like that. You're not an engineer, you're not that kind of engineer. You're not an astronaut. You probably have never given it that much thought unless you're as much of a nerd as I am. So step back and say, well, what are the parts of that question that make me feel anxious? What are the parts where I'm like, I don't know how I would approach this? Well, I don't have the engineering knowledge to know how to approach something like that. I don't have all the answers about timeline, about number of people, about various things that would give me those answers. Take whatever it is that is causing you to feel in over your head, turn that around as a question to the interviewer. If you get a technical question, they say, hey, reverse a linked list. And you're like, wait a minute, I'm blanking. I don't even remember what a linked list is. Turn around and say to the interviewer, hey, I'm struggling to recall the formal definition of a linked list. Would you mind just giving me a quick summary? And then I'll tell you how I would reverse it. Could this ding you? Yeah, it could. Is it better than saying nothing or just freezing up? Probably. Likewise, with those theoretical questions, turning to the interviewer and saying, hey, I'm not an expert on this field, so probably realistically what I would do is I would start by consulting some experts. But regardless of that, here are some of the specific areas that I've been thinking about where I'm not sure how to approach it. Let's try and narrow the problem space a little bit. Let's get some answers. That is a totally valid thing to do. Do I guarantee that it'll work? I can't guarantee anything, but will it make you look better than if you just sort of throw up your hands or if you just sort of stop? Yes. EFTU, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm clearly not, I apologize for pronunciation or lack thereof, asks, how long does it take for you to be successful in the tech industry? Do you have any cons and pros during your career in the tech industry? How long does it take to be successful is an interesting question. It depends on how you define success. Some people define success as I get promoted often, I make more and more money, I have more and more responsibility. Some people define success as I rise to the career level. The career level is the level that the average person will get to normally if they do a pretty good job at a given company. Usually that's around a senior engineer 1 kind of a level if you split them out into grades. And then I do a good job at my work at the career level, and I just kind of can do that forever, and I'm comfortable and happy. That's success means what you want it to mean. Likewise, some people want to become managers. If you want to do that, that's great. I would never want that responsibility. But if you define success as I'm becoming a manager, then that's how you've defined it. Now, unfortunately, as a result of that, how long can therefore have a broad range. What I would tell you is, my personal perspective is, if you're happy with the work you're doing because it's interesting, engaging, and challenging, then you are successful. And if you don't find it engaging, you don't find it interesting, you don't find yourself being challenged, or if you're not meeting your salary expectations, if your benefits aren't where they want you to be, then those specific things are the things I would try to remedy. There's no one recipe for success. There's no one thing that success looks like. If you want to be a startup entrepreneur and get a bunch of VC investment, that's great. That's a great definition of success. If you want to just have a family, have your hobbies, have your home, have your cat, and do your line of business engineering work, and that feels like success to you, also great. The question is identifying each of the pieces that contribute to that and figuring out how to get there. So for example, if I just want to rise to being a senior engineer and stay there, well, what are the criteria for a senior engineer? What do they do that a junior engineer doesn't do? Start focusing on that early, and then you'll find ways to build towards that. The second part of your question, do you have any pros and cons during your career in the tech industry? I'm going to interpret this to mean like, have you had positive or negative experiences? If that's not what you mean, please feel free to put another question in. Yeah, I would say that the tech industry is interesting. It's interesting because it's constantly changing, and yet big elements of it stay the same. Even though technology is always changing, even though computers are getting more powerful, even though you're using a phone or a tablet rather than a laptop or a desktop, a lot of the core problems remain the same, because those core problems are things like, how do we take this abstract concept in our minds and shove it into a representation that will technically work? How can we come up with something that looks good and that our users will natively understand? How do we come up with something that will not be too expensive to run and yet meet our users' requirements? Those questions are the same questions people were asking in 1980. They're the same questions people were asking in 1990. It hasn't really changed. So there's always interesting work, and there's a broad space. But the more you're here, the more you realize that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So that's both a pro and a con. You're never going to run out of work to do, and we are in very high demand. We are all very fortunate to be in this industry because we are really still, even in the current economic state, which I meant to touch on a little bit, that it is the case right now that some companies, especially startups, have been laying off, that the economy is not looking as good as it was when I gave this talk last year. My message is, we're still in a really strong industry. There's still a lot of good options and positions being found here. I don't think you necessarily should be afraid because the economy is not as good, but it may impact your decision making, and that's okay. You over time start to learn the ebbs and flows of things, and it can start to feel rote or the same. That can be a con. I will also say, in terms of specific companies, I had the fortunate/unfortunate experience of very quickly, when I was right out of college, starting in a company I did not like and learning very quickly what I didn't want. And although that was a really painful experience, I really enjoyed it on the other hand, or I enjoy it now, I should say, because I know exactly what I'm looking for. It gave me a lot of the insight that I'm trying to share with you today about knowing what you want and why you want it. So, I don't guarantee that every place that you end up is going to be the place that you like, but every time you take a job or leave a job, you're going to learn something that is going to be really valuable to you in figuring out what your definition of success is. Anonymous asks, is it a bad impression if we're unable to solve a problem? What sort of questions/discussions can we have the interview about it? I can't tell you if it'll be a good or bad impression or not. I can tell you that from my end, I always prefer to hear someone say, hey, I'm struggling a little bit, and try to get some help, and I'll talk it through with them, than to see someone just give up. It's a difficult thing, because once you know that you're not sure about the answer to something, or you don't have the experience they're asking about, it's hard, because it's vulnerable to admit that you don't know something. It can be difficult to admit that. But think about it this way: if you freeze up and say nothing, or if you lie and say something that later is discovered to be not true, you're definitely going to fail. If you say, hey, I'm not sure about the answer to this, or hey, I don't have a particular experience with that, can you tell me more about what you're looking for? Which, by the way, is one of the questions I would ask. Tell me a little more about what you're looking for. That is only going to help you compared with the alternative. It may not save you if the question that's being asked is really core. If someone says, hey, can you tell me about your knowledge of C# reflection, and the product that you're going to work on uses a ton of C# reflection, then yeah, if you don't know that term, you don't know that technology, that could be a problem. That could be a challenge for you. But saying, hey, I haven't heard about that, tell me what that is, and I'll tell you if I know anything adjacent, it can only help you at that point. Would it make me dislike a person or exclude them if they said they don't know? No. Would I eventually maybe choose to pass on somebody because they in aggregate didn't have all the things that I needed, or they were missing enough of them? Yes, but you don't know what your interviewer's criteria are for that, so I wouldn't focus on it. I would focus on answering these questions the best you can. Anonymous asks, how many interviews will you be asked to pass for one person? This varies a lot from company to company, but in the modern tech industry, I would say that on average, we have more interviews than we need. Most companies that I have interviewed with had processes that look something like this. You start with a call with an HR screener who does some basic background questions, learns about you a little bit, tells you about the role a little bit, tells you what to expect. And that's like a short conversation. Then you go to a couple, it may be one, it may be three, it may be five technical interviews with a couple of different engineers, maybe with your manager. These can also be called a manager screen, where they ask you questions to figure out all this sort of culture fit stuff, as well as your knowledge. And then after you've talked to a manager and you've talked to some technical people, there might be a practical interview where you're asked to do some coding of some kind. This could be a Google style algorithm question, or it could just be a practical question similar to what Olo, for example, does. And then sometimes there will be a final interview with the manager or the colleagues that you would be working with. It really does vary, but I would anticipate on average, sadly, 4 to 5 interviews for a given company. It is always okay to ask at the outset, hey, how much time are you looking for me to devote to this? It's also not uncommon to have unorthodox interview experiences. For example, a company that I interviewed with recently, I mean, like a year and a half ago, but even so, had a process where they would have you do a 2-day technical exam for them, where you would work with somebody at the company to solve a problem for them. Automatic, for example, is a company that will do this over a whole month. They'll hire you for a month as a consultant, and they'll pay you during that time. Those are somewhat more unorthodox things. You can work part-time, like while you're doing your main job, and they'll sort of help you through it, but you'll be doing real work for them. So it varies a lot. The only thing I would say is if you're asked to do something that's like a couple days exercise or a whole month of work, whatever, they should be paying you for that. I would not agree to do work for free beyond a couple of hours. And even then I would be a little skeptical. It's not really appropriate for a company to ask you to do a bunch of work, especially if it's work that they're going to use and not remunerate you. Anonymous asks, I have a lot of experience with leadership during my college years. How should I emphasize that in the interview to show that I'm a reliable coworker and also flexible with a culture where I might not fit in? Thank you. Great question. First of all, good job. It's great that you're getting that kind of leadership experience in. The good news is that a lot of that experience is very durable to situations that you will deal with in your technical career. If you've, run a club in college, for example, if you were on the, were part of the executive board for a sorority or a fraternity, if you did activism work, organizing work, these are all just examples that I'm coming off the top of my head. Any of those probably involves a lot of the logistical challenges that will really help you shine. And so it is perfectly valid if you get a question like, how do you approach a problem you don't know how to solve? You can absolutely answer that with a non-technical thing. You can say, well, when I was president of the such and such organization, we had to get in a speaker for such and such, and I had to learn how to do the booking of this and the organizing of that. And that really helped me. And this is how I approach problems I don't know how to solve, because here's an example of a time when I did that. That's a great idea to do, and I would recommend it. If they want a technical answer, they'll be more specific that they want something technical. I would definitely say that anytime you're asked for, something that shows those kinds of soft skills, that's a great time to bring that stuff up. I would definitely recommend it. That's a good answer for it. The only thing I would not do is, if you're sure that what they're asking for is something technical, don't give a non-technical answer, even if it's related. You might want to, you could mention it in passing, but but if you know that they want to talk to you about technology, focus on technology. Anonymous asks, how's the work-life balance for new graduates going into the work field? Well, again, this varies a lot. This is a question that you should ask your interviewers, and I mean all of them. If you have a manager, if you have employees, ask them, what is the culture? Do people come in early? Do they stay late? Do they not? When you look to assign people work, if I were to come to you and say, I'm doing more work than I feel is appropriate, how would you respond to that? Look on Glassdoor and see what people say about work-life balance. They won't be shy, they'll tell you. And also know that the field specifically within technology that you go into can impact your work-life balance. Many companies in tech for engineers will ask you to do a fairly standard 40 hours a week, 5 days, 8 hours each. Increasingly, there are companies, and by the way, there are websites out there that you can go to. If you search for companies with a 4-day work week, there are sites dedicated to helping you find companies that have a 4-day work week. If you're looking for companies that'll do things like let you work 4 10s instead of 5 8s, that is, 10 hours, 4 days a week rather than 8 hours, 5 days a week. You're looking for companies that will let you work part-time, there are services and sites that will help you find that. But it can vary a lot. If you end up in the financial industry, for example, you end up in something adjacent to the healthcare industry, you may be working more hours. And that's okay if you're comfortable with and willing to do it, and if you feel that your compensation or potential compensation is commensurate with that. The classic example of this is a startup might ask you to work 60 to 80 hours a week because they're a startup and that's what they demand of everybody. That doesn't mean you have to accept that. You can decide that's not what you're looking for and you can pass on that opportunity. Or if you believe in the startup, you think they're going to make money back, you think it's going to be worth it for you, then you could consider doing that. Personally, I would say that I don't find working more than 40 hours a week or seeking out an opportunity that works more than 40 hours a week to be worth it, because I don't think that the change in compensation or what I'm likely to get is that big. But it's a highly personal question, and so I don't have a single answer. Any other questions? I think that's the last one that I see. Oh, somebody just popped in. Guillermo asks at Olo, and I'm going to take Olo as an example, although I know that you may be asking specifically, is there a particular minimum set of technical skills that you would expect interns to already have by the time they're interviewed? Or are there skills that may not be accepted for interns, but that would give one an edge in an interview? That's a great question. So I will speak first about Olo in particular, and then I will generalize to the industry at large. I don't typically expect that interns have a lot of experience beyond being engaged in a program that is geared to teaching them these skills, and maybe ideally having some technical things that they can show me to show what they're working on and learning. The interns that we hire have not done things like write tests before necessarily. They have not done things, maybe they haven't used the languages that we use. They probably haven't done sort of the things that are core to technical work that's not just solving problems, like, you know, writing tickets, talking to customers, talking to other departments. All of that is okay. And technically, I typically look for someone who's a fast learner and who will be quick on the uptake, rather than somebody who already knows all the things, especially for an intern. For an intern, I would almost always say, I'm mostly looking to see, when we do those practical interviews, do you have basically enough engineering skill that you can, you know, write some code in some language and do okay? And are you quick in adapting to and adjusting to problems that I might ask you to solve? That's all I'm really looking for. I am not looking for anything more than that, because it wouldn't be reasonable to expect someone who's not in the industry yet to have a ton of experience in the industry. Now, what would give you an edge? Projects. I love to see projects that you've worked on. If you have a GitHub and you can show me some code that you wrote, awesome. If you have a website that is a live demo of a project you've done, awesome. The proof is in the pudding. You know, if you can show me that you did something, it makes me feel a lot less worried about having to figure out whether you did something, because I can see that you did it. And so I don't have to worry about it as much. So I strongly recommend, and I think CodeDays will help you with this, have some projects that you can show, that you can whip out as examples, whether it's through showing source codes, showing a working website, or just describing it. That will help you a lot. That will set you apart, not just at Olo, but I think in a lot of places. And I hope that answers your question. Anybody else? All right, not seeing any additional questions. I will just close by saying that I really appreciate all of you coming, all of you staying a little bit over time with me. I really hope that it was helpful to you. I am 100% happy to solicit further questions, to respond to them through email. My email address is right there, and you are absolutely welcome to reach out to me. Also, more than happy to talk with you about Olo positions, if that is something that you're looking for, or to get you connected to a hiring manager there. But you know, if not, no hard feelings. Don't worry about it. My primary goal here is, and I hope that this has been helpful, is giving you the skills that you need. I would love to chat with you about any questions that you might have. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. And I don't know, Alpa, are there any like last wrap up things that you need to say?
Thank you so much, Max, for staying over the scheduled time and answering everyone's questions, and for all of your effort in the presentation. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you again, Max, and have a great day. All right. Bye, everyone.